Throughout the Gospels, there's no shortage of people doubting Jesus' power, but it's gotta hurt him the most when it's his own friends. Despite the fact that Jesus has shown that he has authority over the weather, disease, blindness, even death itself, Jesus' closest friends still spend this whole story in a cloud of despair, to the point where Jesus is weeping and angry. The story starts with the sisters of Lazarus sending an urgent message to Jesus that Lazarus is very sick and needs Jesus' help. Now at this point, Jesus is a day's journey away from Bethany, where Lazarus and his sisters live. Now to understand why Jesus and his disciples have decided to go travel so far away from the center of Judaism, we need to understand the context of his ministry as a whole. His goal at the beginning of his ministry is to show the Jewish people, hey, I'm the Messiah and I'm here. He wants to be accepted by them so that he can save them. During this time, all the miracles that he's doing has to do with proving that he is the Messiah, either based on Old Testament prophecy or based on the rabbinic teachings. This starts with him clearing out the temple. He fashions a whip. He drives out the money changers. He takes authority over the temple of God. That is his first sign that, hey, I have authority here because I'm the Messiah. And that's a sign to every Jewish person. Jesus actually performs this sign during the Passover. This means that millions of Jewish people saw or heard about this sign and took the news home to all corners of the earth that there was a man in Jerusalem claiming to be the Messiah. When he's teaching at this time, he's being very clear. Hey, here's what the Old Testament says, here's what it means, and here's how you should interpret it in your life. But for the most part, this doesn't work out. The Jewish leadership reject him as the Messiah, even to the point of saying that the power that he's doing some of his miracles, casting out demons, is actually the power of the Prince of Demons. From that point on, Jesus only does miracles because of someone's individual faith. They believe that Jesus has the power to do the miracle, and therefore Jesus does it to reward that faith. This is where we constantly hear the line, your faith has saved you, your faith has set you free, and faith becomes an integral part. Instead of just, I am the Messiah, it is, you have faith in me, therefore you will be rewarded. His teachings also change from something very direct, this is what the Old Testament says, this is what I say, to very indirect. And the way that he does this is through parables. Parables weren't a new idea, this is something that rabbis used a lot. Potentially, Jesus is trying to extend his time on the earth so that he can actually reach those who are truly seeking him, and avoid those who are only seeking to find fault in him. During this portion of Jesus' ministry, the Jewish leadership come to him on multiple occasions and ask for a sign to prove that he is the Messiah. Now Jesus in response calls them wicked, because he's already given them tons of messianic signs and they've rejected all of them. However, he does tell them you will get one and only one more sign, and that is the sign of Jonah. Now the sign of Jonah, what on earth does that mean? Jesus is going to be swallowed by a fish and spit up 3 days later? Not quite. Jonah actually prayed to God while in the belly of the fish, and this is the first part of it. I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called to you from the land of the dead, and Lord, you heard me. The word there that gets translated land of the dead and oftentimes gets translated the grave is actually the Hebrew word Sheol.
Sheol would be a place where everyone goes after death, both good and bad. However, they would be separated. The bad would go to hell, and the good would go to not heaven, but paradise. It's nice, but not home. Then there would be a chasm in between. Is this an accurate view of the afterlife? I have no idea, but this is the understanding that Jesus was working with when he communicated to people at the time.
So Jonah's saying that he went to Sheol and came back from Sheol, that Jonah died and was resurrected. Now this section of Jonah is written like poetry, so we don't know if he literally means that he went to Sheol or if he means he was good as dead. But what Jesus means when he says the sign of Jonah, he does mean death and resurrection. That's the sign that he's telling the Jewish leadership, this is the only sign you're going to receive left. And throughout the rest of the New Testament, we see that sign performed 3 times. First, with Lazarus, dead and resurrected. Secondly, with Jesus, dead and resurrected. And the third time at the end of time in Revelation, when everyone is resurrected from the dead. During this second part of Jesus' ministry, he has claimed on multiple occasions to be God by saying things like, before Abraham was, I am. And on these occasions, the religious leaders decided to stone Jesus to death because he is committing blasphemy claiming to be God, and he can't possibly be God because he's a human.
While I was editing this video, I decided that this word blasphemy deserves a bit more attention. In English, this word means the act or offense of speaking sacrilegiously about God or sacred things, and even that can be a bit difficult to understand. But in Hebrew, it simply means to make light of something. So this word has a plethora of uses. When Noah sends out the dove to see if the floodwaters have been made light, he uses this word. When David rejects Saul's offer to marry the princess, the other servants ask David if it's trivial to become the king's son-in-law. This is the same word. They're asking David if he's making light of the opportunity to join the royal family. So the word is used in many ways, but when applied to God, it's clearly an evil thing to do. We see this happen in Leviticus, and the punishment for the man who does so is death. So when the Pharisees hear Jesus say that he, who they perceive to be merely human, is equal to God, that sounded like making light of God. And based on the example in Leviticus, they believed that stoning was the proper punishment. So that helps us to understand that 1, the Pharisees were trying to obey the law, and 2, they very clearly understood that Jesus was claiming to be God. This is important for anyone who claims that Jesus was a good teacher but not God. If Jesus was a good teacher, he must also be God, because a good teacher would not go around deceiving everyone into believing that he is God. Now we can go back to the Pharisees trying to kill Jesus for blasphemy.
Both times Jesus escapes, and after the second time, he decides to leave the land of Judea, where the Pharisees have authority. Now Bethany, where Lazarus and his sisters live, happens to be in the land of Judea. In fact, it's very close to Jerusalem, the capital of Judea. So that's the reason that Jesus is so far away from them when Lazarus gets sick. Now when the messenger comes to Jesus, he doesn't immediately fly into action traveling to see his good friend Lazarus and heal him. He instead says, "Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this." So Jesus actually stays where he's at for 2 more days. He's in no rush to go help Lazarus. And then he tells his disciples, "All right, it's time to go. Let's go see Lazarus." Now his disciples get really defensive. They say, "Jesus, just a few days ago, the people in Judea were trying to kill you. You want to go back there now?" But then he tells them Lazarus is sleeping. Now the disciples hear this and they say, "Well, that's great news. If he's sleeping, he's probably going to end up getting better soon. There's no need for us to go risk our lives to go see Lazarus if he's already on the mend. He's already getting better." Now Jesus didn't mean that Lazarus was literally sleeping. He meant it figuratively, the way that he often says that when people are actually dead. So Jesus comes out and tells them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there. For now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him." The disciples are shocked. Okay, he's saying Lazarus is dead, but we're gonna go back to Judea anyways, even though Lazarus is dead. Apparently, that's how important this is to Jesus. Apparently, he's got something really important to show us, but they can't understand it. So Thomas says to the disciples, "Let's go to and die with Jesus." That's the mindset of the disciples going into this mess. They think we're going to go back to Bethany, back to Judea, close to Jerusalem, where the Pharisees have decided that they're going to put Jesus to death. And we as his followers are probably guilty as well, and we're probably all going to be killed. But you know what? We're followers of Jesus, and we're going to follow him to the grave. This might have something to do with the fact that Jesus time and time again has promised his followers that if they have faith in him, they will not die. However, now we have Lazarus, one of Jesus' closest followers, and he's dead. This might seem like a contradiction to the disciples. This might seem like proof that maybe Jesus isn't the Messiah, or at the very least he can't keep his promises. But Thomas shows here we're committed, we're loyal, no matter what. If this means death, let's go along with it. Jesus and his disciples arrive at Bethany, but they don't go into the town. They stay outside of it because they don't want to get murdered. And when he arrives, he's informed that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Now Martha and Mary had been at their house mourning, and there had been many people that came from Jerusalem to mourn alongside them. When Martha hears that Jesus has arrived and he's waiting outside the town, she goes to meet him, and she immediately says to him, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask." Now we have to acknowledge that there's something odd going on with the timeline here. We're told that Lazarus was dead for 4 days, but Jesus only waited 2 days to come. And we can account for that with the travel time. The messenger took a day to get to Jesus, then Jesus waited 2 days, and then Jesus took a day to travel to Bethany. But that means that Lazarus must have died the day that the messenger left. That also means that there's no way, no matter when Jesus left, that he would have arrived before Lazarus died. So what does Martha mean here? Is she getting on Jesus' case for not staying in a city where his life is at risk? How did she expect Jesus to get there in time before Lazarus died? Also, why doesn't she believe that Jesus has the power to raise Lazarus from the dead? He's already done it for 2 other people. How much more so would he do it for Lazarus, a very dear friend to him? Well, this has to do with how the Jewish people understood and taught death at the time. See, the rabbis taught that after a person dies, their soul hovers over their body for 3 days, and after those 3 days have passed, the soul descends to Sheol. When Jesus had raised people from the dead in the past, it had been within that 3-day period. You know in The Princess Bride where that guy says, "Oh, he's not fully dead, he's mostly dead."
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead. Mostly dead is slightly alive.
And as strange as that sounds, that's what they believed at the time. That Jesus could resurrect somebody from the dead as long as their soul was still hovering over their body. However, once a person's soul descends to Sheol, nobody can do anything about it. You would have to be God himself in order to resurrect that person. So in response to this reprimand from Martha, Jesus responds to her, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day." Many Jewish people at this time were very focused on the law and disregarded the prophets entirely. Martha is showing that she has a proper understanding, that the prophecies that are shared by Daniel and Isaiah are going to come true, and that everybody will be resurrected at the last day. However, this isn't what Jesus is talking about, and he tries to clarify to her. Jesus tells her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die." Do you believe this, Martha? The statement that Jesus says here is claiming that he is God in 2 different ways. First, he says, "I am," which is a direct reference to the name of God given to Moses. And the next thing that he says is that he is the resurrection. So he's saying, "I am the resurrection." And resurrection, as we've discussed, from Sheol is something that only God is capable of. So he's saying, "I am," meaning that he's God, and the resurrection, meaning that he's God. And when he asks Martha if she believes this, she responds, "Yes, Lord, I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." And she still misses it. At that point, Mary leaves. She goes back to retrieve Mary from the house, and Mary comes to Jesus. Now, the mourners who had come from Jerusalem thought she was going to the grave to mourn Lazarus there, and so they came along with her to mourn as well. When she gets outside the town and sees Jesus, she falls at his feet, and she says, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." Word for word, the exact same thing that Martha says, the same reprimand towards Jesus. If only you had gotten here a day earlier, you could have raised him from the dead. But now, you're powerless. And when Jesus sees Mary weeping, and he sees all these other people from Jerusalem weeping and wailing alongside her, it says that a deep anger welled up inside of him. What could possibly make Jesus angry about this situation? I can't say for sure what made Jesus angry, but this is how I understand it. Jesus is sitting here looking at the sadness that is caused by death, and death is caused by sin. The wages of sin are death. If there was no sin, then there would be no death and there would be no sadness. However, there is a solution to this, a solution to sin. But the solution to sin is Jesus dying. Put yourself in Jesus' shoes. He's looking at these people that have caused a problem for themselves. They sin, therefore they die, therefore they're sad. And the way to fix that whole issue, that these people causing their own sadness and their own death, is that I have to die. And Jesus makes it very clear to us that he doesn't want to die, but he wants to save us more than he doesn't want to die. He later asks God, if there's any other way to accomplish this, let's do it that way. But it becomes clear to him that there is no other way, and therefore he makes the sacrifice. He does the thing that he doesn't want to do, and he dies for our sake, to pay the price for our mistakes. If I were in his shoes, with that being the situation, that would make me angry too. Not only that, but all the people closest to Jesus believe that he can't do it. They believe that he can't fix the problem that they're dealing with, even though he's proven to them time and time again that he has unlimited authority. Jesus angrily asks, "Where have you put him?" And the people respond, "Come follow us and see." Then we hear that Jesus wept. Jesus arrives at the tomb of Lazarus still angry. This is a door just carved into a rock with a big stone rolled in front of it to cover it up. Jesus tells them, "Roll away the stone." But Martha comes in and tries to stop it. She says, "Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible." Again, we have this reference to 4 days. If he had only been dead 2 days, she probably wouldn't have protested at all, because Jesus could do what he had done before and just push that soul back into the body. However, in her mind, Lazarus' soul is now in Sheol, and not even the Messiah should be able to reach down into Sheol, pull back his soul, and put it back into his body. But Jesus responds to Mary, "Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe?" Mary stands down and they roll the stone aside. And Jesus says, "Father, I thank you for hearing me. You always hear me. But I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe that you have sent me." Then Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave cloths, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him go." Jesus prays to the Father, but he's very clear about what he's praying. He's thanking the Father for this opportunity, not asking the Father to do anything. When he tells Lazarus to come out, he separates the prayer from the command. He is thanking God, and then he is commanding Lazarus. This separates the power. He's not asking God, "By your power do this." He's saying, "I'm doing it by my own power." This showcases to the Jewish people at this time, this guy is not only the Messiah. He just reached into Sheol and brought a soul back from there and put it into the body and resurrected a person. That is something that only God could do. Now, many of the mourners who came see this miracle occur and they instantly believe in Jesus. There's no way that they can remedy that in their mind other than to say this is the Messiah and he is God. However, many of them are still loyal to the religious leadership of the Jewish people, so they return to Jerusalem and tell the Pharisees what Jesus has done. Now, what we don't see here is the Pharisees saying, "You're mistaken. He didn't actually raise him from the dead. It's a trick." They don't say that. Instead, they say, "This guy certainly does many signs. If he's not stopped, then everybody is going to believe in him, and there's going to be a revolt from the Jewish people against the Roman Empire, and our entire nation is going to be wiped out." The religious elite have agreed we are doomed. The people are going to believe in this man as the Messiah, and that is going to lead to the destruction of the temple and the Jewish people. However, Caiaphas, the high priest, has something else to say. He says, "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't realize that it's better for you that one man should die for the people than the whole nation to be destroyed." Here we have it, the sign of Jonah. Undeniable proof that this guy is the Messiah. Now they can believe what's plainly right to them, but that's dangerous. That could lead to the Jewish people being wiped out if Jesus is going to lead the people against Rome. So instead of doing what's right, they choose to do what's safe. Now, doing what's safe is not inherently bad. In fact, it's a good thing to pursue safety, but not at the cost of doing what's right. The leadership of the Pharisees show that they understand these signs prove beyond the shadow of the doubt that this man is the Messiah. They know that the right thing to do is to believe in him and follow him. However, because it's dangerous, they refuse to do what's right, and they instead do what's safe. I see people making this same mistake all the time. They know what the right thing to do is, but it's also a dangerous thing to do, and therefore they go about doing the safe thing instead. They do what preserves them instead of what preserves justice. The author here, John, points out how ironic it is that Caiaphas actually nearly got this whole thing right, because he said, "It's better for you that one man should die for the people than the whole nation to be destroyed." Because that's exactly what happened. What they meant to do was to kill Jesus in order to prevent Rome from taking them over, but what actually happens is Jesus dies in order to prevent sin from taking them over. This is really interesting because it shows us that whether we choose what's safe or what's right, God's plan always works out exactly how he intends. The opportunity is in front of us to participate in the correct way to do things, despite the fact that it might be dangerous sometimes. If we reject what's right and just in favor of what's safe for us, God's plan still goes forth exactly as he intended. The only difference is that we miss an opportunity to participate on God's side. To some extent, this is going to happen in every one of our lives. At some point, we will have to choose between comfort and doing what's right. That doesn't mean we'll never be safe and we'll never be comfortable, but it means at some point, we will have to sacrifice our comfort and our safety if we want to continue doing what's right. Thanks for listening, and make sure to subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this.